Welcome to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randle and Gus Kearns.
Welcome back to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where our train is headed up today to Illinois to preview the Fighting Illini. We have Scott Richey in from the News-Gazette. He's an AP Top 25 voter. He covers football and basketball for Illinois, does a fantastic job. Listen, if you're talking about the Fighting Illini this year, you're talking about one of the top teams in the country. They were last year. They bring a lot back. Brad Underwood has it going here in the Big Ten. So let's bring Scott in right now. Follow him on Twitter at SR Richey. Scott, great to have you on. Want to talk Illinois basketball. Thanks for joining us.
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
So looking back last year, Scott, it was a magical year for the Fighting Illini. They ended up 24-7. They were second place in the Big Ten, 16-4. A lot of expectations. They played well, won the Big Ten Conference tournament, of course. So talk about it a little bit. How did COVID affect them, if at all, and the season as a whole? Because it was a special year in Champaign, Illinois.
I suppose really the only way COVID affected Illinois, beyond the fact that, players and the coaches were essentially, in a bubble of their own creation for, the whole season, was maybe that they didn't win the Big Ten title, and there was obviously some consternation about that. Michigan, it was the regular season champions. They also played fewer Big Ten games. Of course, that was agreed upon by everyone heading into the season, that if there were some cancellations, that it would just go by winning percentage. Michigan had the higher winning percentage. So they get the title, and that's fine. Illinois fans are probably going to dispute that forever. But Illinois did not have any COVID issues during the season. They had a few players that had to go into quarantine, late summer, early fall. But once the season started, they were good to go. And Illinois was, I believe, the only Big Ten school that did not have, across any sport, have any games changed or cancellations because of COVID issues on their part. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's an accomplishment in of itself.
Yeah, and at the university level, they were kind of at the forefront of testing. They created their own saliva test, so that all players and coaches were tested every single day. And they managed to get through that, and also they just kept to themselves. They kind of did what was necessary to put together the opportunity to have what turned out to be one of the better seasons in program history.
And we're in New Jersey, so I remember watching this team and just some key moments here. That Baylor game early in the year, it got away from them. There was some foul trouble, but they hung right in there with the Bears, obviously won the national title. That was a barometer for me. And then even after they had a couple stumbles, they had the loss there to Missouri, lost to Rutgers away, which was big here in New Jersey, of course, for the Scarlet Knights. But then they went on and really got rolling here. It was a big bounce back against Penn State. I remember that game, just an offensive explosion for about 10 minutes at Penn State, beat Indiana, beat Purdue, Northwestern. And then over the course of the remaining part of the year, they won like 11 of 12 heading into the Big Ten Conference tournament, and then took care of business, 3 nice wins in the Big Ten tournament. So I would think that even some of the struggles along the way, this team was really peaking at the end of the year.
Yeah, and that's been sort of a staple of Brad Underwood's teams, even the ones that didn't have a lot of success. They did get better at the end of the year. You could see improvement in the on-court product. But yeah, the end of last season was really impressive. The only loss from mid-January until the NCAA tournament was a road loss at Michigan State, where Ayo Dosunmu gets hurt.
That's correct. Yep.
But it's just they put together a really good stretch there. And then honestly, like the last 3 regular season games of the year, maybe their toughest stretch. They win at Wisconsin, without Ayo, beat Michigan and Ann Arbor without Ayo, and then win at Ohio State with Ayo back. And, that was just a huge push into the Big Ten tournament. I think probably the reason that they won it, they were playing their best basketball. Obviously, at the very end, it did not come to the conclusion that they were wanting. Second round loss to Loyola was a huge disappointment, but still one of, like I mentioned, one of the better seasons of Illinois basketball really ever.
And you have a lot of solid players from that core returning. But I want to start with the coaching staff, which is interesting. Brad Underwood has done a great job there, but he is losing 3 of his assistants from last year: Orlando Antigua, who's a legendary recruiter, Chin Coleman, and Stephen Gentry, who went back to Gonzaga. So talk about their impact. I'm not sure who he's brought in, but I would think that anytime you lose 3 assistants, even though Brad's done a great job, I would think that would shake things up a little bit and put some sort of uncertainty into the fans of the Illini.
Well, I think when the news started coming out that Orlando and Chin were both going to wind up at Kentucky, that Steven was going to take the Gonzaga job, after Tommy Lloyd left to become Arizona's coach, to create that opportunity, the fans were a little concerned. But Brad Underwood has been able to kind of reload his staff pretty well. He promoted Jeff Alexander from assistant to the head coach to a full assistant role. And Jeff, for the last 4 years, was one of those behind-the-scenes guys that you don't really see much or hear much about, but just honestly just a solid dude, with previous Division I, assistant coaching experience, ties in state, ties internationally from his previous stops. He has recruited abroad, and that's one of Brad Underwood's goals, is to recruit everywhere. So, and honestly, just a nice guy. I was happy to see him get that promotion. Then he hired Chester Frazier, away from Virginia Tech, obviously a former Illinois guard. Has kind of uniquely, in his coaching career, has only been a high major assistant. He joined on with Bruce Weber at Kansas State immediately after his playing career was over. Was there for 7 years, then left to join Mike Young at Virginia Tech for a couple. He's come back and maybe he's been that recruiter that Orlando Antigua was for Illinois. Both of Illinois' commitments in the 2022 class, 4-star guards, Sincere Harris, Jaden Epps, Chester Frazier guys. He's the reason, that Illinois, landed those commitments. And, he was just a kind of a bulldog as a player, got more out of his game than he probably should have, just because he worked really hard at it. I think that's carried over to his coaching career. And then last assistant hired was Tim Anderson. He was at DePaul, is a Chicago guy, kind of maybe fills that Chin Coleman role a little bit, just with those ties to the city, which I don't think you have to have that at Illinois, but especially as Brad Underwood's going to recruit nationally, but to have a Chicago guy, I think, on staff, and a guy that's well respected, not only for his abilities as a recruiter, but in player development, because he has trained pros like Derrick Rose, Anthony Davis, Jabari Parker, a lot of the Chicago NBA guys. So that's I think a really good pickup for them. And then Underwood kind of has treated it as he put together his first staff out of nothing, essentially. It was guys that he hadn't worked with before. In Orlando Antigua and Chin Coleman and Jamal Walker was a carryover from the previous staff. So he felt like, he said this before, he's like, I'm just going to go do it again, and we'll see what that means. But the 3 that left were obviously key to building Illinois into what it has been the last couple of years, but the bones remain the same. Brad Underwood is still there. It's his team to run, and Illinois is all in on Brad Underwood, because he was announced honestly just like an hour and a half ago. They just gave him a 1-year contract extension that'll keep him in Champaign through 2027.
That's tremendous. Scott, breaking news here on the Illinois Preview on the Screen the Screener podcast. Tremendous. And listen, you lost some key players, Io, Georgie, Adam Miller, but there is a core returning here that should have this team absolutely in contention. It will be in the top 20 of every preseason poll that you see. A good group, a winning group coming back, headlined by, fingers crossed. Were you nervous, Scott, with Kofi Cockburn? Did you think he was always coming back? Because social media, of course, and you're more tied in than we are, more than anyone is, there were starting to be some rumors that he may end up going there, but it didn't work out. So talk about the core coming back, and were you ever nervous that Cockburn was really going to leave?
Sure. And honestly, when he entered the draft, I figured that was it, and that I had seen him play his last game at Illinois, and I think that was maybe his intention, but his draft prospects maybe didn't match up ultimately with what he felt they should be. The ability for him to benefit off of his name, image, and likeness in college. That legislation passed right before he made his decision, but he knew it was coming. I think that certainly changed the tide. But then, when he's in the transfer portal, and I went back and looked and couldn't find any players that had been All-Americans ever transfer before, like come back to college basketball for another year and play somewhere else. Like I just thinking I went back 30 years and it hadn't been done. But I was like, is Kofi going to be the first? And there was the Kentucky rumors with Orlando and Chen making that move. The two guys that he knows, Orlando was the reason he came to Illinois almost. I think there were some nerves, but his return to Illinois just totally changes the dynamic for this team. They went from a group that without him, I thought that they could be still competitive, maybe in that top half of the Big Ten, but their floor is much higher and their ceiling is much higher with Kofi back in the mix. And I think I still haven't maybe finalized my preseason top 25, and I've got a few weeks to do that still. But I think I've been higher on them maybe than other people, just because I feel like I see it every day. But I think they're a top 10 team with Kofi, with Andre Curbelo making what everyone is expecting to be a huge sophomore leap, and I think he does make that leap. And then Trent Frazier, DeMonte Williams, super seniors, kind of maybe more depth on this team than they've had in a while too.
Yeah, Curbelo really came on, has that ability, and you especially saw that in the Big Ten Conference Championship, has the ability to create plays for himself and others. He has that sort of, Scott, magical feel. He's a guy who could take a huge leap to like an All-American-like status here. Last year, he was all Big Ten freshman, and he was the conference's sixth man of the year. I think he's a guy who could really soften the blow of losing Io if he takes that next leap.
Absolutely. And there's a reason that he goes by El Mago occasionally. I know that Deion Thomas, who's one of the radio analysts for the program and also the Illinois all-time leading scorer, likes to use that. It's because he is a magician.
Yep.
With the ball in his hands. But if you look at what he did when Io was out, where he sort of took over that role as a preview of what's to come this year, he was really good. Almost had a triple-double at home against Nebraska and played really well at Wisconsin, at Michigan. And I think that was, like I said, what he will probably be, this season when the ball will be in his hands just all the time.
And if you look at their recruiting class coming in, listen, ranked fourth in the Big Ten per 24/7 Sports, national ranked top 20. Talk about the new players coming in. A couple big transfers too, Scott. Alfonso Plummer coming in from Utah, a 6'1" guard, and Omar Payne, 6'10", 215, coming in from Florida. So between the freshmen who are ranked very high and the transfers, there's some depth on this roster, not just talent, but maybe more depth than you had last year.
Yeah, and I think some talent, because those three freshmen, I feel like they have potential to be, really good. It might not be right away, and they're in a situation where, all three are four-star recruits, and like they're gonna have to battle to even get on the court ahead of a pretty veteran bunch that's in front of them. But Brandin Podziemski is just a flat-out scorer. Was Wisconsin's Mr. Basketball, put up like 35 points a game in his senior year. Really good shooter. Luke Goode out of Indiana, 6'7". Has just gotten bigger. I think he's physically maybe the most ready of the freshmen to play in the Big Ten, just with his frame. But really, heady guy, like pretty decent with the ball in his hands, because as a junior in high school, he was forced into the point guard role because his team's point guard got hurt. It's not his natural position, obviously, but improved his skill set. RJ Melendez, really good athlete, long wing with 6'7", bouncy. Again, another really good shooter. That's sort of the tie that binds with all three of them. Then you look at Alfonso Plummer, again, shooter, one of the better ones in the Pac-12. He's the guy that in the game at Colorado scored, get this right, I think 23 points in 7 minutes, and he just went off. He hit 11 threes in a Pac-12 tournament game a couple years ago. Omar Payne, the big out of Florida. I think you're going to play him and Kofi together, but Omar's a guy at 6'10". Maybe Brad always says maybe he's the best athlete on the team, and can literally touch the top of the backboard.
Wow. Wow.
So and he will help Kofi defensively, because Omar is a pretty good defender, good rim protector. Will maybe take some of the pressure off of Kofi in that regard. So a lot of interesting pieces to work into the puzzle at Illinois.
Yeah, and great call with that three-point shooting, which is so essential. Alfonso Plummer, he went 6 of 11 against Washington in the Pac-12 tournament, had a few games before, 3 of 7, 3 of 7, 5 of 7, 4 and 8. He's a flammable guy. Curbelo is going to be penetrating, kicking out to him, Coburn inside. I agree with you, Scott. I think this team is somehow a little underrated heading into the season. Let's talk about the non-conference. Obviously, Brad's going to want to make sure that he has solid opponents, and they always do. Last year, you had a run there before it started, even with COVID and some cancellations. Baylor, Duke, Missouri lost 2 or 3, but certainly great games, close games all around. Talk about the non-conference this year and what he has scheduled.
Yeah, I think if you look at it, when you combine the non-conference schedule with the Big Ten, Illinois will play 26 out of 31 games against high major opponents.
Wow.
And that's what Brett Underwood wants. They've got some interesting games on the schedule. They play at Marquette in the Gavitt games, host Notre Dame in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. They made the more notable ones. They got Arizona at home. It's a return game from 2 seasons ago because last year COVID wiped that out. So that'd be an interesting game. And then the Hall of Fame Classic in Kansas City. They'll open against Cincinnati, who's I think could still be really good with the new coach there in Wes Miller, but the game that I'm sort of hoping happens, even though Illinois, Kansas State would be interesting just because that's Underwood's alma mater and Bruce Weber is obviously still at Kansas State.
Sure.
I would like to see Illinois, Arkansas. I think that would be a great game.
Oh my goodness.
I'm in Kansas City. So they've got some challenges on there. And then, of course, a handful of low major teams at home to fill it out, but like I said, not very many of those games.
All right, Scott, you've given us a few minutes here. Fantastic job as always. I'm going to put you on the hot seat. So what do you think about the Fighting Illini this year? Fantastic year, ran into Loyola Chicago, disappointing end, but certainly solid season, real solid season. And I kind of think you're underrated this year, that people may not realize how good you're going to be. Give me a prediction here for Illinois. Where are they going to be in the Big Ten, and how you think what would be a successful season where fans would be happy coming off of last year with this year's crew?
That's a good question about Illinois fans and being happy because it takes a lot sometimes. But I think like last year, this team has maybe Elite 8 potential. Like Sweet 16 for sure, and they probably should have made it that far last year, if not further. As far as the Big Ten, I think the race could go anybody's direction, but right now I'd say Illinois, Michigan, Purdue are probably your top 3 contenders, and right now I have Illinois at the top of that group, and we'll see if they can maybe hold on to that top spot when they get into the thick of Big Ten play.
Sounds great, folks. Scott Richey, Illinois men's basketball and football for the News-Gazette, does a fantastic job. He's a voter. Gave us a few minutes here. He's deep in college football right now, but got us stopped on the train, had a beverage with us, and talked about Illinois, one of the best teams in the country. Follow him on Twitter at SRRichey, Richey. Scott, thanks for a few minutes. Love to catch up with you during the year because I think this Illinois team is going to be a little underrated, and all of a sudden we're going to hit 2022. They're going to be back in that top 10 if they weren't before then, and we'll be talking about Final Four aspirations again for sure.
Yeah, sounds great to me.